Meenu Batra has just been released from ICE detention. The single mom of four immigrated to America 35 years ago after her parents were killed in anti-Sikh political violence in India. Since then, she built a life in Texas, working as a licensed court Hindi, Urdu, and Punjabi language interpreter. Batra was detained on March 17th, despite having lived and worked in the United States for decades under a legal status known as withholding of removal. That status allows someone to remain and work in the United States because returning them to their home country would likely put their life and freedom at risk. Joining me now is her attorney, Deepak Ahluwalia, to discuss her case, the precedent it sets, and what this could signal about the direction of immigration in the United States. Deepak, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm good.
When did you first learn that Meenu Batra had been detained? How did you become her lawyer? And what explanation was the government giving at that time?
I did, on a professional level, actually know Meenu through her interpretation services, especially when I had started my work at the border back in 2015. Fast forward 11 years later, I got a call from a friend of Meenu's, and she basically told me that she got a call from Meenu saying that she was picked up by ICE, that she's in a temporary holding facility. And that's where we kind of start like getting the intake together of the specifics and mechanics of the immigration history. But you mentioned that she had a grant of withholding, right? In the year 2000, the judge legally found if Meenu were returned back to India, that she would more likely than not suffer persecution or torture. It's a very important legal standard that I want to highlight. Historically, in the United States, they never went after people who had a withholding grant status. You can renew your work authorization, you can live here indefinitely, unless the government challenges this in the future by way of you either committed a felony or some sort of crime that warrants this withholding being taken away, or DHS now files a motion before the same court and says, country conditions have changed so drastically in this country that you now need to take away your withholding grant that was issued to this person. So what was very interesting in this case was the manner in which she was picked up. You know, nothing before, no conversation, just 26 years later at an airport, and boom, she's in ICE custody.
Yeah, that's incredibly sad and just shocking. You know, you can be in this country, never have committed a crime, raised a family here, worked literally for the court system, and then just kind of get picked up just like that. What does it mean that the Trump administration is basically has detained her even though she had this status? Are they effectively challenging the overall protection this status fundamentally offers to people in America?
That's exactly what's taking place. When Trump 2.0 came in, what they did was they basically went through the back door and they said, well, you know, by definition, grant of withholdings legally precludes us from sending this person back to their country, but the law doesn't say anything about sending them to a third country. To be very transparent, people in ICE have told me, you know, that this is nothing but to just pump up the quota numbers that have been put up to say, ultimately, we have removed X amount of people. And I can matter of fact say this to you, that had we not filed the habeas as quick as we did, she would have been sitting in a third country. Absolutely, she would have been sitting in a third country. They're imprisoned when they're over there. So it's just it's a gross miscarriage of justice, right?
Was Batra given due process in this whole thing? And can you kind of enumerate what were the specific causes that allowed you to get her out of detention?
So our entire habeas petition premised on really two basic things. Under due process grounds, she was afforded or should have been afforded the opportunity to basically know the reason of her detention, why she's being picked up after 26 years. And the second component of that was they went from a 0 to 100. You know, there was no middle ground. There was no, let's start this. We're going to ask you to come check in because this administration has asked us to start keeping more tabs on individuals with your status. There's going to be a site visit, a home visit. There was none of that. It was just you go through TSA and there are 4 undercover ICE officers who have cornered her from both directions as if they were taking out a cartel member. This was someone who was going for a job for interpretation services. They could not have done this 26 years later without no notice at all and not even afford the responsibility for her to get counsel or even ask for the reasons of her detention.
Wow, that's incredibly scary. I'm wondering, have you had a chance to speak with her since she was released? And How has she talked about her experience in detention?
I have spoken to her. Yes, I've spoken to her a few times already since being released yesterday morning. I am not probing as much because, as you can imagine, it's a life altering experience. What I will say is, there's one thing that always touched me in our conversation over, the last 6 weeks of her detention. What she said to me was that, Deepak, I consider myself to be a very strong person, both mentally and emotionally. And she also prefaced by saying that, I was in Punjab. I lived in Punjab through what was going on in the genocide and the targeting of Sikhs during the late 80s and very early 90s, because she comes here in 1991. And she says, this has affected me to the core, right? Like, I've never let anything else after that shatter me. This has affected me. So I don't think I can say anything more than that, right? How she was feeling in those 6 weeks.
Gosh. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, she reminds me of my own mom, surviving that same genocide. They're around the same age, raising as a single mom, raising me. She raised her kids. I feel like there's so many qualities about Meenu Batra that made this case draw global attention. And I'm wondering, do you believe that the visibility that came with it because of who she was and how this case, as you mentioned, was like a 0 to 100, there was like really no middle ground from the government. Did all of this pressure and visibility play a role in her release?
When Meenu was detained, I didn't want to push the needle in any way. If they really want to, they can go ahead and remove her to a third country, and there's nothing I can do about it. So until we got that habeas and TRO in, I actually kept it mum. But once I had everything there, this is where state or national level attention will play a role in putting some sort of pressure in terms of what's going on. And to be very honest, I was a little dumbfounded that the government was pushing back so heavily, considering that her 18-year-old son joined the military and has sworn to protect this country. So I was personally really shocked about that.
That's heartbreaking that you can be sworn to defend this country, but this country won't let you defend your own mom in a sense. Now that Meenu Batra is out of detention, is she in the clear? Like,
The fight isn't over from my perspective. It is a victory. Of course, the victory is that she's out. And the other victory is that the federal district judge who signed the order gave specific instructions and protections to Meenu. Namely, she cannot be redetained unless prior notice is given, and an informal interview is conducted of what they plan to do with her. That is the wild thing of all of this, Angad, that to this day, despite having been in detention for 6 weeks, there was no third country identified. There was no plan. It was just arrest first and figure out later. But we actually have another card on our table. Because the youngest son has joined the military, she is now actually eligible for a new relief. And that relief is called military parole in place. I can confidently say that, one, she is actually on its face eligible for a grant of this military parole in place application. And second is, if this goes our way, then we can actually apply for a green card before the end of the year. This is still a journey. It is still scary in terms of how hard ICE wants to play, in terms of, how aggressive do they want to be with this third country deportation. But at least we have protections and barriers in place while I can advance my legal strategy and our options of what we're looking to do.
it seems like you've really covered your bases here, trying to approach this from every angle. I was wondering, was Meenu Batra's detention even necessary? I mean, are we actually making the process of tackling the issue of undocumented immigration and people in this country any better by this approach?
We're not in good. I mean, that's my that's my blunt answer. We're not. The reason for that, not trying to generalize it, it's for profit. One, right? It's for the profit of, the big facilities, big corporations, sorry, who run these facilities, who are amassing billions and billions of dollars of additional profit. People in the administration themselves who are lining their pockets with making these deals. And so none of it is necessary. In fact, there are several reports that continue and have continued over the years to say that detaining someone in the facility versus releasing them and putting them on some sort of whether it's like monitoring through like an app or home visit or a site visit, or even if you want to do ankle monitor, is actually no less effective. Meaning, like if this person's inside versus outside, it's not worth the taxpayers' money and the money that we're dumping into this. And without again generalizing too much, there is a racism component to this, right? This is more just instilling that fear in other immigrants, saying even if you've been here for 35 years and even if you've been paying taxes since 1992, guess what? We're going to other you because we can.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. Is there anything else you wanted to say about Meenu Batra's case?
I just want to thank everyone in terms of the support. People really pushed and advocated for this on social media. It would have been very easy to drown us out. And ICE, in whichever capacity, whether we're talking about on the habeas front or, exercising their authority under parole, would have just said, well, we're not really getting much heat for this. So, let's just continue doing what we're doing. So I do firmly believe that there were so many different things happening in the background that gave us the result that we wanted. And I would ask, as does Mino actually, to continue being the voice for the others who are detained and sharing other individual stories as well, because there's a lot of them.
Right on. Deepak, I want to thank you so much for the tireless work you're doing to look after immigrants in our communities here in the United States at this time. I know it must be incredibly taxing and difficult for you, as well as your clients and those whose stories aren't making it to the front lines. It was really, really a pleasure to speak with you today to learn more about Minu Batra's case. And I'm really wishing the best for her and her family and others that are in a similar position.
Thank you, Angad. I appreciate it.